Okay, with Donald Mitchell, Marion Gruber, preparedness in prevention is the short film played at the Science and Nature Film Festival. It's a film, obviously. She's in the title. It's about Marion Gruber, who is a world-renowned expert in vaccine development, regulation, and licensure. So basically, a pretty hot topic today. If you told me this 5 years ago, who Marion, like what she does, I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Now it's like now my eyebrows are peaked. Now I'm interested. Now I'm wondering what this is all about. I guess this is something that for at least in our generation we're going to be paying attention to for the rest of our lives, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure.
So this is something that this is in your wheelhouse, right? You're it says that you're the founder and owner of Medical History Pictures Inc., correct?
Yeah, so I started Medical History Pictures Incorporated with two other people, Paul Offit and Gloria Lewis. Paul is a renowned vaccine maker and advocate, and Gloria is a producer, and I'm a director, writer, editor. And so we started that together quite a number of years ago to make the movie, the feature film, documentary feature film called HILLEMAN, which was about Maurice Hilleman. He's probably the greatest vaccine maker that ever lived. And so,
And,
yeah, I've been doing this work for quite a while.
and what year was that film come out?
That film came out in 2016. We started working on that film actually back in 2004 before Maurice Silliman passed away. And it took us quite a while to find the funding to make that movie, but we ultimately made that and put it out in 2016.
Did it get some retraction after 2020 because of the coronavirus?
It did, yeah. Actually, it was on the film streamed on Curiosity Stream for a couple of years after the coronavirus pandemic. So yeah.
So tell me about this particular project in Marion Gruber. When did you decide? When or the team or yourself decide? Oh, I want to make a movie about her. I want to make a short film about her.
Yeah, so Marion was somebody that I was not that familiar with until we started working on an idea we had that we were thinking we wanted to do a film about Operation Warp Speed. And so we started doing some research and just interviewing some people about that. And Marion was one of the people that I interviewed when we were looking into that project. We ultimately decided that project was just not feasible for us. We didn't have the funding to be able to really do it justice. And so, in the process of that, though, interviewing Marion, we realized that she had a really interesting story to tell because she had been involved in not only the coronavirus pandemic response, but also in the response to the Ebola outbreaks in West Africa in the teens, and also to the pandemic, the flu pandemic that happened in 2009. So she was involved in all of that, in addition to Zika and other issues while she was at FDA. So that was how we sort of came upon her story and decided she would be a really interesting story to tell.
So the film's 30 minutes long. You kind of give it like the first like 5 minutes. You give us this kind of like rip roaring kind of like almost like a montage of like interviews with basically like news stories and news segments about coronavirus. You got Anthony Fauci coming out, and then you kind of slow things down and kind of like tell her story. And but you at the same time, like in 30 minutes, you give us a ton of information. Like
Yeah.
it's like it's entertaining, but it keeps it's coming at us at warp speed. So I'm just curious about the structure. Okay, you decide you make a movie about her. Did you was it always going to be a short film? Did you want it to be larger? Like what was it always going to be 30 minutes? I'm curious about what your structure was when you started filming.
Yeah, so we always knew we wanted to do a short documentary on Marion, just because I just didn't feel like we had the ability to do a feature length story about about her career at this stage of the game. It's just because, you know, again, partly because of budget and partly because of just the scope of the project. But knowing that we wanted to make that short documentary, we decided that in order to make it interesting for an audience, we had to keep it moving. And there was a lot of story to tell.
Yeah.
We didn't really want to narrow it just down to the COVID pandemic because we just didn't feel like that really did justice to Marion's work. But obviously, that was sort of the culmination of her work at the FDA. So we decided to talk about the variety of pandemic slash outbreaks that she was dealing with while heading up the Office of Vaccines. And and it was a whirlwind because it was one thing after another. As she says in the film, they were literally getting to the end of uh, helping to bring the Ebola vaccine to licensure. And I think she signed the papers in December. And at the same time, COVID was breaking. And of course, in December, she couldn't know that it was going to be what it was going to be.
Yeah.
But they were ready for a break at that point, and there was no break to be had because COVID was right around the corner. So,
Well, and it's once in a century, once in a lifetime virus too, right? So,
yeah, yep,
and so obviously people are, like I said in the beginning, it's like people are now curious about her job, what she does, even more so because of what happened with COVID. So even the way you structure the film, it's like you're kind of centering on her job and centering on what's all this craziness that happens, but you like someone taking another filmmaker would have made it a little bit political. Did you ever think about like, is it's because it for some reason it became a political issue and you kind of steered away from that in the
yeah.
film? Was I'm sure that was very conscious on your part.
Yeah, so well, first of all, let me just back up and say, we made this film in coordination with our vaccine makers project. So I helped to co-create a project that's an educational project that's called the Vaccine Makers Project. It's run through the Vaccine Education Center at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and that project is designed to try to teach the next generation of parents about vaccine science, about the immune system, and about infectious diseases and how they function. So, in that context, yes, you're right. We could have turned this story into a political story, and it might have been a lot more controversial in that regard. But I think we try to keep our eye on the ball in terms of what we're saying about science, and not make it become about a lot of distracting things outside of science. And so, I think a big part of what we're trying to do with a film like this is to say, here are these amazing people that are working in public health. I mean, they're working behind the scenes. These people are anonymous normally. I mean,
Yeah.
frankly, trying to find video footage of Marion Gruber was grueling. It doesn't exist. So, these are not people that are in the limelight in any way, shape, or form. And so, we're trying to say, these are people just like you and me, and they're out there doing really noble work. And we should be not only applauding them, but thankful that they're standing guard for us because they're doing work that protects us all. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And there's like that's the thing that fascinated me during even the time where like they're obviously extremely smart individuals. It doesn't seem like they're doing it for the money. You know what I mean? Like there's
yeah.
no
Well,
grand conspiracy because like what's in it for them? Like on a human level, like why would they conspire? You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
all these
yeah,
conspiracies. You know what I mean? It didn't make
yeah.
any sense on a logical level.
Well, and that's part of the thing is that it's easy to think about that and sort of believe that there's conspiracy behind everything when you don't know the people that are involved.
Mhm.
But when you meet somebody like Marion, you realize like, oh my gosh, she's like a really genuinely good person. And so, yeah, you're right. I mean, these are not people that are making, $1 million a year doing what they're doing. Um, I mean, certainly they get compensated for the work they do, just like any of us. I'm sure it's important to them to be able to make a living, but I think it's also important to them to be able to, to make a difference in the world.
Well, I
Thank
guess what I'm saying,
goodness they do that,
what I'm
right?
saying is that there's the private sector, and with their brain and their science background, there's certain organizations and companies that they can work for where they can make a lot of money.
Yes, right, right.
Right.
That's
So
right.
they choose, like, the supply and demand on their part is like they got a lot of, I'm sure they get even people going, headhunters calling after them, right? They're civil
Yeah.
servants, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, exactly. Well, I know for a fact that you're right. I mean, there are a lot of people that are in that realm that do go on to work in the pharma industry. Nothing wrong with that either. But as far as Marion goes, when she left FDA in I think it was 2021, she went to work for IAVI, which is the AIDS initiative that is helping to try to bring an AIDS vaccine to market. And they're also working on other disease states like Ebola and other neglected diseases. I mean, it just goes to show that's who Marion is. She went to work for a nonprofit basically.
yeah.
So, you know,
100%. And I always like, it's like it's like, even because the United States is a superpower, so they have like a certain responsibility to educate and kind of like the world and in the nation, of course. But I always felt that there was a breakdown in communication in terms of educating the nation. I know there's so much information, it came out like crazy, but like saying you can, because even in your film you talk about Ebola, right? Where like, okay, the virus takes place, and then you go to trial, and you kind of show the process of like finding the vaccine, right? And it's the same thing that, generally speaking, that happened with COVID virus, right?
yeah,
Where everybody was like, "Oh my God, how could they do it so fast?" And it's like you know what I mean? There was all this conspiracy they're implanting. It's like, oh, it can't be safe because it's done so fast. And I'm not saying it's perfect, but I'm saying that this is what they do when there's a virus.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
the same analogy, but they didn't. It didn't seem that there was they were educating the people about that. So
Yeah, I think, part of that too is just that it's complicated. I mean, and I think Marian tries to explain this to some degree, or we tried to help her explain that in the film to some degree. But, in the normal case of events, things move slowly through the FDA because the FDA is handling, the Office of Vaccines at least alone is handling, probably, a dozen different or more. I don't know. There's, many, many products that are being taken through the office. When you come into a situation where you have a pandemic like COVID-19, I mean, that just took precedent over everything else. And so one of the ways, I think the main way that they sped up the process there was to put everything else on the back burner and put all hands on deck for that one thing. And so they weren't waiting for weeks to have the next meeting. They were literally like saying, show us the data. We're going to meet you tomorrow. And we're going to move forward from there. And they just put all of their efforts into that one thing so that they could get to the finish line faster, but still do it in a rigorous, and thoughtful way. So, that's one of the things that people don't understand, and why would they? Who cares what happens at the FDA on a daily basis, right?
yeah,
And, as long as they're doing their jobs, it's not like any of us are really that interested in the meetings they're having at
yeah.
the FDA. But,
Well, they cared in 2020 and 2021, that's for
yeah,
sure.
right, right. So,
And they cared like never before. And one of the issues is that even for myself, where like Lathy Fauci would go on and he would talk on in March, and the things that he said weren't relevant like 2 weeks later. And it was almost like, don't talk. Just like, if you don't know anything, don't say anything, because it further confused people. That, and then they just went back to his talking points from March and said, well, how can we believe him? Look what he said like a month ago, and what he
yeah,
said a month ago is not valid, is not real, right? And that's what caused the conspiracy. That's what caused the you know what I mean, the momentum of people like being skeptical, I guess, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and of course
Yeah.
the issue is you're dealing with a disease that no one knows anything about,
Yeah. So
and so we're but that's part. I think that's part of the education that we as a public need to have
yeah.
is to really understand and learn about how the scientific process. And no, science doesn't have all the answers all the time. In fact, science wouldn't exist if we had all the answers all the time, right? So in order to find the answers, science needs to do the investigation and to learn and to build on what we've learned. And so, that we saw that in real time with the COVID-19 pandemic. So,
And I guess my individual worry would be that if this happens again, that nobody's gonna listen to anybody, right? Like they're just gonna it's kind of scary in a way. Like they're if they say like hypothetically, hopefully it won't happen, but say that a similar coronavirus happens and they tell people to stay home, nobody's gonna stay at home. Like they're you know what I mean? Like they're not gonna believe anybody. That's the problem that's happening now.
yeah, yeah. Well, yes, I think that is definitely a concern or a possibility that could
Yeah,
happen. We could also be faced with a disease that's very different from COVID that could be horrifying to observe.
yeah.
If you look back at like what smallpox looked like, if 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 a pandemic like smallpox were to ever happen, where you break out in these horrifying pustules all over your body and all over your face, I think people would respond a little differently to that. So I think it's all a matter of sort of what do we
Yeah.
think, what are the risks and what are we afraid of, right?
Yeah, and then also it could be more potent, meaning that like if someone gets the virus, they're dead, right? Doesn't matter who you are.
Right. Well, with smallpox, 30% of the people that got the virus died.
Yeah,
30%. It was under 1% with COVID.
yeah,
30%.
yeah. And I think that's because, well, because the reason why only 1% passed away, right? Because in our health and our, whatever, it's just like there's a certain, like from a statistical standpoint, there was a certain population that passed away from COVID, right? Like in terms of health and age, I guess, right?
Well, yeah, there's certainly been higher risk groups that
Yeah.
are more susceptible to hospitalization or death from COVID. That's for
Not to say
sure.
that healthy people didn't die, just but there was a
Yeah.
high percentage of certain people that died. Yeah, you're 100% right. It's all about the potency of what takes place, but it's just like I'm sure that they learned a lot. I'm talking from an emotional level. Like what they're doing is amazing. What they're even what she's doing in the film. I'm just talking about from an emotional level, the educational level, like the communication level to people. I thought that I hope they learned a lot, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
like a PR level, like you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Well, yeah, frankly, I was just happy to see the responses through the film festival actually of how film festival audience goers were responding to the film because I think that was a response that I was really happy to see. They were surprised that there were people like this out there
yeah.
doing this work. And I think in many ways, when you meet somebody like Marion through a film like this, it's reassuring if you had some concern at some point about the FDA and what they're doing. You meet somebody like Marion on film, and I think she's reassuring to you.
Well, you did an amazing job with the film because she comes off strong, but then she also has that personality. The you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like she comes off that with confidence. She comes
Oh yeah. Well, she's a no nonsense person. I mean,
yeah.
it's like she's very nice, but she's also very firm. So, you
Like
know.
perhaps she should have been one of the people that during the first, when Trump brought up his minions, the
Oh
first,
yeah, yeah.
maybe she should have been one of those people up on stage.
Well, I don't know. That's the thing about Marion is
Yeah,
she's not somebody whoever looks for the limelight
yeah.
at all. But I can tell you for sure that she certainly stood up to what was going on politically at that time because there was a ton of pressure on the FDA to approve those COVID vaccines before the election. And she was one of the main people that stood in the way of that happening because the FDA didn't have all the data that they wanted before that point. So
like obviously reading between the lines, like Trump wanted the vaccines to be finished before the election because then he felt that he was going to win the election. He probably would have. He might have won the election if they were done before. So it's all about politics, right? It's all about like him getting reelected. That's all he cared about.
I don't know what he cared about, but
Well, come on,
I
like
think
let's
that
like yeah.
I think that's a good guess.
Yeah,
So
I think that's 100% guess. Let's just put it that way. Like he's pretty transparent. Like I you know what I mean. If you told if you, the thing about him is that if you asked the question, he would say yes, right? Like
yeah,
it was pretty obvious like
yeah.
that that's happened. Yeah. So tell me, okay, so tell me about the interviews. You interviewed just her just once. I just see that one kind of constant kind of interview with I
Yeah,
think
so I interviewed Marion sort of ahead of the filming on another occasion, a couple other occasions. We talked quite a bit over Zoom, just so that I could learn more about her background, her story, the work that she had done at FDA. And then, I also interviewed the other folks that are in the film because they were colleagues of hers and have worked with her and know not just the work that she did at FDA, but know what she's done outside of FDA as well. So
and then so then you basically got the core interview of her and then you interviewed some of her colleagues and then you got like all kinds of new like different news kind of segments. You start the film with Don Lemon on CNN, right? And then you kind of mainly do CNN and then PBS. You do a little bit of MSNBC, and then where did you have to like scour the archives of the news to find what you're looking for, I'm assuming?
yeah, actually, yes, I did a lot of work, but we also worked with an archive researcher, Maddie Akers, that she did a great job on this film, finding just all kinds of different news footage that addressed all of these different epidemics that they were fighting against. And so, I think of those as the antagonists in this story, obviously. And so that news was all about what was happening at the time and what they were battling against, in addition to the disease themselves, the public outcry or the public concern that was surrounding these various outbreaks.
The antagonist of the story. I find that interesting. Like that, it shouldn't. Well, I guess it's I'm an idealist, I guess, but it shouldn't be like that. But I guess in today's 21st century news, 21st 24-hour news media, they have to tell us something, I guess, right?
Well, yeah, and I guess when I say antagonist, I'm not saying the media is the antagonist. I'm just saying they're presenting stories about the antagonists,
No, I understand.
about
Yeah,
Ebola, about
yeah,
COVID, about
yeah.
flu, and I mean, and of course, what does the news typically do with anything? They heighten the stakes on what's happening. But when there's a disease like Ebola, which is horrifying, those stakes are already pretty high. So it doesn't take much to see uh, the high stakes there when they're presented on the news.
And the irony is that when Ebola, they didn't really talk about it that much. Like they maybe talked about it like once every couple hours, but it's just like it wasn't like a sexy story to the American, I guess the American news outlet, right? So
Yeah, I mean, well, it wasn't a sexy story, that's for sure, but there was a lot of concern. I don't know if you recall when those couple of cases ended up in the United
yeah,
States.
of course,
All of a sudden, it's like everybody's a little worried because, oh my
exactly.
God, as long as it's in Africa, we're okay with
That's sort of what I was kind of
it.
leading.
Yeah,
So yeah, they really didn't cover it if it wasn't, but if as soon as it's yeah, as soon as it's American, then it's a big
yeah,
deal, right?
yeah, yeah.
So what did she think about the film? When did she? I'm assuming she watched the film.
Oh yeah, of course. No, I think Marion thinks the film is great. I think she's appreciates that I think she feels like we got the story right, and I think she appreciates that we shone a light on the work that she and others like her are doing.
So is there like a that's the one thing that people, I guess for myself, is about the vaccines. When I was getting the vaccines, I got the vaccines, of course, and I was pro-vaccine. Is that the one thing that I was worried about was that like it's the drug, like these drug companies are making these vaccines, and I never really trusted the drug company, but now I'm supposed to trust them now. Like that was the one kind of conspiracy I had, or the one concern I had
Yeah,
about
yeah.
taking the vaccine.
Yeah. Well, I like to think of it this way. When we're sick and we want something to get us better, we're really happy to have the drug companies around, right? I mean, because it's like if we get some disease, there has to be something that can help me, right? But when we also like to distrust them because they make a lot of money. So, you can't really have it both ways. If you want to have the things that can save your lives, you need those people around. And of course, they're in business to make money. So I'm not going to apologize for them, but I think that I think we have to be realistic with ourselves because we live in a really great era. There's a lot of things that can help us, and we have the drug companies in many cases to thank for that. But
Yeah, well, I guess it's like universal healthcare, like socialized medicine. But I guess that it's one of those things where maybe it doesn't get done as fast because there's not a financial incentive.
yeah, right. Well, yeah, I mean, COVID-19 got done really fast because the US government took the financial risk out of it. I mean, by
Yeah,
with Operation Warp Speed, they said we're not going to have any risk for the drug companies. So drug companies go do what you would do if you had no risk. And that's what they did. And it
yeah,
got done so fast, right?
but not necessarily the state. That's not a safe thing, I guess, right? Like when you're
Well, it is a safe thing in the sense that so what the government said was go make these vaccines, not don't just develop the vaccines, but manufacture the vaccines. And we're going to buy all of those products from you and we're going to put them in storage, right? For a couple of months. And in the meantime, the FDA and the advisory bodies are going to evaluate the data on these products that we've already purchased from you. And if the products turn out to be safe and effective, then we're going to release them because they're already in our warehouses and we're going to put them right out to the public. If they had not proven to be safe and effective, those products would have been thrown away. And I'm sure that there were products that didn't get used that the government bought because they didn't win the race, right?
yeah.
But the products that ultimately got put out, the vaccines that got put out, they were proven to be safe and effective. And look at the millions and millions of people all over the world that have gotten those vaccines now, and you don't have any major side effects that are in vast numbers of people. So
Yeah.
um, you know, so yeah, that was an amazing thing that happened and very, very well thought out.
It is interesting. It's because you're right. It was a race. It was about competition, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And that,
exactly.
see, listen, you're talking about the film that you kind of abandoned, but like I know there's been a few documentaries done about it, but there's a great story here.
Yeah,
What
there
you
really
just
is.
described, right?
Yeah, I mean, well,
Yeah,
and that's the thing, like you're saying, it was a race. It was a race between the companies, right?
yeah.
But it was also a race against time and against the disease. That was the real race. It was people were dying on a minute by minute basis.
Yeah.
And so it was really a race against time and against COVID-19.
But it's also like smart people wanting to get the best of themselves. Like if you erase what you just said, which is the most important thing, of course. But if you just talk from a human standpoint, it's about like competition, about like getting the best of yourself. It's competition to make the most money. It's like capitalism, at its best and maybe worse. I don't know, but it is basically about like really super smart people getting together in a room for hours on end trying to create something, right? Like
Yeah,
it, like,
yeah.
yeah,
Well, and when you think about like how rapidly things happened with a technology um, that was not used for vaccines in previously, or at least not used for an approved vaccine previously. It comes down to what companies and what people were prepared for the opportunity. I mean, that's really what another amazing part of the story is. Just there were a couple of companies out there that were ready to move forward with mRNA technology. And they just, they were prepared for the opportunity that happened. And and we have an amazing technology now at our disposal moving forward because of that opportunity to prove that it worked.
Yeah. Yeah, listen, I don't know if you like if this is like a setup for like funding for that film that you're talking about, but like, yeah, there's maybe you're
Good.
laughing, but because there's
Yeah, no, I'd love that.
yeah,
Yeah, anybody that's listening, if you have money for that film, we'd love to make it.
well, it could even be a Hollywood movie too, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's lots of high-end Hollywood drama involved in that storytelling because
sure,
there were a lot of interesting personalities and there were many balls moving in many different arenas to make
100%,
that
right?
happen. So yeah,
And then like as you referenced even before, so you got this like president who basically wants to like who's a little bit of a lunatic, sorry. Basically, he wants to get reelected, right? And he thinks he's got it like in February of that year. He thinks he's got it in the bag, right? And then then all of a sudden he's losing reelection, and then he knows that if this thing gets done, right? And like
yeah,
say,
it's the October surprise that you'd always want to have, right? So
yeah, and then he's going to get reelected, right? So it's sort of like that. Then there's that what I'm saying is there's that extra Hollywood element too, right? Where
yeah,
like
sure,
so yeah,
yeah.
it's a fascinating time. It's like everybody was just so in their literally in their houses and like people were trying to survive. There's a lot of like if people were sick, like our relatives were sick. There it was pretty crazy. Everybody's like really kind of going through a lot of turmoil in a general sense. But if we're taking a few step back a few years later, like 5 6 years later, there's some really interesting things that happen from a storytelling standpoint.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right.
So this seems like a good step in the direction. So she's fantastic, and this film is really good. It's really nicely edited. Nice. It's like a really you got a lot of moving parts happening, but it kind of all kind of works. I watched it the second time today, and it's like, oh my god, like it really like I could because I'm like analyzing it. And it's like it's got all these things in the air, and but you put it all together. And in the end of the film, it's really about the children, right? I think that's what your themes of the film is that because you show the children in the end in these in different countries. It's all about the future of the kids, right? Like hopefully they'll have an okay future.
Yeah, I mean, it's the future of all of us, and
Yeah,
that's what kids are, right? They're our future. And, yeah, I mean, I think they just represent that we can move forward. And and in order to be able to continue to move forward, I think what we're trying to say with the film is that we have to be better at being prepared in the future. I mean, there were many things that we were prepared for when COVID hit, but there were also many places where we were caught unawares. And we got a little bit lucky because the mRNA technology was just there, right? I mean, that technology's been being developed for 20, 25 years. It was just at the point where it was ready to take off. If that hadn't been at our doorstep, who knows what would have happened? It could have taken months or a year longer to get to a vaccine. Um, so
mm-hmm.
being prepared is the big deal.
Yeah, 100%. Well, Donald, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate everything that you said, and yeah, fantastic film. I'm sure it's doing well, and I think that yeah, I just think I hope like I know it's about funding, and it's about time, and it's about all these elements, but I hope that you get to make the films that you want to make. I can see that you can kind of tell that instinctively that there's a lot of films in your head that you want to get out there.
Yeah, for sure.
So I hope that you're able to do that. And it's like it's all about education and information. And I always believe like this is what I do for a living, but storytelling and kind of like films like yours kind of like resonate with people, right? Because it's like all the garbage is away. Now there's distance of what occurred, and you're using an individual like Marion. I think I said Marion. You're referencing. I think you said Marion. So I apologize if I.
Well, yeah, no, it's just she's German and that's how she pronounces her
Okay.
name,
Yeah.
Marion. But yeah, I mean, I think she'll answer to Marion too. So
But it's a great way to tell her individual story, to tell this macro kind of story, I guess, right? So it's a
yeah, yeah.
great way to tell the story. So I appreciate your time, and let's hopefully we talk again when you make your next film.
All right. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.